Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, August 25th, 2020. This is Council President Tony Troutner. Just a reminder, this is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 coronavirus emergency. We are broadcasting live on Kent TV 21, the City of Kent Facebook page, Kent TV 21 YouTube channel, and then welcome to anyone that is calling into this meeting today. Let's go ahead and get started. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Council President. Council President Troutner?
Here.
Councilmember Boyce?
Here.
Councilmember Fincher?
Here.
Councilmember Kaur?
Here.
Councilmember Larmer?
Here.
Councilmember Michaud?
Here.
Councilmember Thomas? And thank you, Madam Mayor, for being in attendance.
All right, moving on in our agenda, are there any changes from council or staff? All right, not hearing any, we're going to go ahead and get started with department presentations. The first one is payment of bills, which everyone has a copy of. So we will move on to the next presentation. And I'd like to welcome Samuel Alcorn to talk about the Star Lake Rezone Ordinance.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Sam Alcorn, planner with the City of Kent. And as a planner, it's my job to review this project for compliance with the city's rezone criteria, as well as providing public notice and collecting public comments. This afternoon, I'll summarize the Star Lake Rezone proposal, as well as staff review and recommendation for the project. To begin, the Star Lake Rezone proposal is a request to rezone one parcel totaling 2.32 acres from half MRT 16 and half CCMU to be entirely GCMU. This property is located at 2526 South 272nd Street and is currently developed with a single family house that is vacant and in disrepair. The property directly to the east is currently the Star Lake Park and Ride and will be the future site of the Sound Transit Link Light Rail Station. The light rail station is currently under construction and slated to be operational in 2024. Properties to the west are developed as multifamily apartments. Properties to the south, which is outside of Kent city limits and in Federal Way, are developed as multifamily apartments as well. And the area to the northwest is a large wooded wetland surrounding the McSorley Creek. This property in question has a frontage along Southeast 272nd Street, which is classified as a minor arterial, and 26th Avenue South, a local street. Upon redevelopment, the parcel will be required to take access from 26th Avenue South, as it is a lower classification roadway, and 26th Avenue South will also be reconstructed by Sound Transit as part of the Federal Way Link Light Rail Extension project. Moving on to staff review, the proposal was reviewed under the State Environmental Policy Act, and a determination of non-significance was issued on June 26, 2020. Only one comment was received during the 14-day public comment period, and it was from Caitlin Piazza of the Department of Ecology here at Washington State, stating that the proposed project is located in an area that might have been contaminated with heavy metals due to air emissions originating from the old Asarco smelter in Tacoma. Staff confirmed this and will be requiring soil sampling, which is recommended by the DOE as part of any future development permit review. Staff reviewed the rezone listed, the four criteria that are listed under Kent City Code 1509050C that are used to evaluate a request for a rezone. And I'll go through those four standards now. The first is that the proposed rezone is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Staff has found that yes, it is consistent, and land use is allowed in this zone, together with mixed use development regulations and design guidelines, will encourage dense, high quality, pedestrian friendly development near a mass transit station, and may include commercial or multifamily residential housing as part of a mixed use development. The second criteria for review was that the proposed rezone and subsequent development of the site would be compatible with development in the vicinity. As it's surrounded by multifamily uses, we find that it is compatible. Next, will the proposed rezone unduly burden the transportation system in the vicinity of the property with significant impacts that cannot be mitigated? And staff found that it will not burden the transportation system and actually will support the future light rail station by having a transit-oriented development. And lastly, have current circumstances changed substantially since the establishment of the current zoning district to warrant the proposed rezone? So Sound Transit actually received funding in 2008 to extend the light rail from SeaTac Airport to South 272nd Street, which is adjacent to the parcel. Since then, housing prices and demand have increased substantially in the region. Housing and commercial services near reliable public transportation infrastructure like the future light rail station has been especially desirable. And by allowing this rezone to the GCMU zone, we'll be accommodating this increased demand by allowing more flexibility in development options and higher development potential. This and the staff report was all presented to the Kent hearing examiner, who held an open record hearing on July 29th of 2020. And the hearing examiner issued a recommendation of approval on August 12th of 2020. Staff also recommends approval for the Starlake rezone. And I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have on this application.
Great, thank you so much. Any questions or comments on this? Councilmember Core.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. So rezoning is, I guess, the soil sampling, that's going to be done before permits are given to the developer?
That's correct. So currently this is just to change the zone. It's not for any proposal of construction or development. And so once a development permit is applied for, then soil sampling and potential mitigation will be required.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fincher, I see you have your microphone off.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, is 300 feet the standard for notifying residents and other businesses within the area?
Yes, it is. It gets,
Okay.
yeah, and a notice will be mailed to every resident within 300 feet, as well as certain agencies that request public notice.
And I know that we have changed that from time to time. I just wanted to know if this was the standard. And I saw there were only 2 people who testified. I'm fine with it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? All right, so I'm not seeing anything. Are there any objections? This is ordinance number 4367. Any objections moving this forward to the consent calendar? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on in our agenda, we are going to welcome Stephen Lincoln to talk about the King County Flood Control District Milwaukee to levy interlocal agreement amendment. That's a mouthful. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Council President. Council President Troutner, Mayor Ralph, members of the committee, good evening. My name is Steve Lincoln. I am an engineer with the Department of Public Works Environmental Engineering Design Group. I'm here to present a amendment to an interlocal agreement, or ILA, with the King County Flood Control District for the Milwaukee 2 project. Next slide, please. As shown on this first slide, the Milwaukee 2 project is located along the Green River, just to the east of State Route 167. The existing levee requires improvements in order to provide increased flood risk reduction and allow the city's right bank levees to be fully accredited by FEMA. Next slide, please. The pictures on this slide and the following slide were taken by drone in early February during the high water event along the Green. As you can see, at its peak, particularly in the location identified by that yellow arrow, the Green River was beginning to intrude onto properties on the riverbank. Next slide, please. As events like this will become more frequent in the future, this illustrates the urgent need to improve the Milwaukee 2 levee. To this end, the city entered into an ILA with the King County Flood Control District to begin the process of designing the levee improvements. Next slide, please. As a result of the alternatives analysis process, the city and county selected the alternative shown on this slide. The preferred alternative consists of relocation of the South 259th Street roadway away from the Green River, the construction of flood wall and setback levee improvements immediately south of the relocated roadway, and enhancements to the river habitat, including off-channel salmon habitat and additional flood storage capacity. Next slide, please. The amendment presented for your consideration modifies the previous ILA to add an additional parcel to the list of properties to be acquired as part of this project, and the additional funding required to complete property acquisition. Next slide, please. The acquisition of this property will allow us to continue the development of the project towards its final improved condition shown on this artist rendering, which is a significant aesthetic improvement over the current condition of the riverbank as shown in the inset photo to the lower right. As this amendment is necessary for us to continue pursuing the Milwaukee 2 project, it is our recommendation that the council authorize the mayor to sign this agreement on the city's behalf. We thank you for your consideration this evening and the continued support of our projects.
Thank you for that presentation. Any questions on this project? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Continuing to do that good work down there on the Green River, and so grateful for our partnership with the King County Flood Control District. So if there are no objections, this is for the mayor to sign an amendment to the existing ILA with King County Flood Control District for the Milwaukee 2 levee project. So if there are no objections, not seeing any hands raised, we will go ahead and move that on to the consent calendar. Thank you. And moving on in the agenda, I'm going to welcome Mike Mactutis to talk about an ILA with the Water Resource Inventory Area 8.
Thank you, Council President, Mayor Ralph, council members, good afternoon. This is Mike Mactutis, and I'm the Environmental Engineering Manager for the city. And the second amendment on your agenda is for the interlocal agreement we have with RIA 8, which is Water Resource Inventory Area 8. And could you go to the next slide, please? So this, the agreement is a 10-year agreement, and we are 5 years in. RIA 8 is just to the north of RIA 9. RIA 9 is the Green Duwamish watershed, and it's something that we're very heavily invested in and involved in. RIA 8, as you can see on the map on the right side, has just a small portion of Kent in there, which is the Clark Springs water supply just east of Maple Valley. Most of that water supply is in RIA 8 in the Cedar River watershed. A small portion of it drains into the Green River watershed. Next slide, please. So RIA 8 is the most populated RIA in the entire state. It includes Seattle as well as many other cities in the watershed, 30 local governments, plus one, which is proposed through this amendment, as well as just like RIA 9, it has a conservation district, other agencies, businesses, citizens, and its goal is to bring all these people together to collaborate and bring dollars and energy towards salmon habitat restoration and restoration of the endangered species. Next slide, please. And just like RIA 9 also, there is a cost share for the local agencies. So the total of all of the jurisdictions' contributions for 2021 is $629,000. Because of the City of Kent's small portion of that watershed, our portion is $203. Next slide, please. So the amendment is to accept Snohomish County back into the Salmon Recovery Council. They left a couple of years ago due to budget issues, and now they are requesting permission to come back, which requires approval of the local jurisdictions. Their portion of the cost share for 2021 would be about $64,000, and they are able to fit that into their budget now, so they are requesting a re-entry back into the council. And that is my presentation, and I can answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you very much. Again, another great partnership that we have with Raya 8, but especially Raya 9. So I completely support welcoming them back. Any other comments or questions from my colleagues? All right, so if there are no objections, moving this forward to the consent calendar. All right, I don't see any objections. So thank you so much for this presentation. And thank you again, Mike, for all of the work you do between the Flood Control District and with Raya. We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving ahead in the agenda, we're going to welcome back Sean Bauer for an ILA with the City of Covington.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you for your time today. My name is Sean Bauer. I'm the Water System Manager for the City of Kent. And today I'm here with a second amendment to an interlocal agreement for joint operations between the City of Kent and the City of Covington for the relocation of Kent water facilities through a road widening project on State Route 516 that the City of Covington and Washington State Department of Transportation are working on. I touched on this project during my presentation at Council Workshop last week. The City of Covington is moving forward with the design and construction of widening State Route 516 from just east of Wax Road at Jenkins Creek to 185th Place Southeast, which is the light at the intersection where Home Depot and other businesses are located. This project will impact our Clark Springs, Kent Springs, and Armstrong Springs transmission mains. And as owners of this infrastructure, located in another jurisdiction's right away, it is our responsibility to relocate our infrastructure. In August of 2016, we entered into an interlocal agreement with the City of Covington because it was the most efficient method for both our agencies to facilitate the design, permitting, coordination, and relocation of our transmission mains. Next slide. The second amendment is a time extension only. All other aspects of the original agreement remain in effect. The extension is needed to allow for design and construction to be completed. 60% design has been completed and 90% design should be out soon. Construction should start in 2021, with the majority of work expected to be completed in 2022, and the project should be complete by 2023. So with that, I'll answer any questions you may have.
Great, any questions or comments? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Again, a much needed project for Covington. So are there any objections moving this forward to the consent calendar? All right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and up next, I'm going to welcome Rob Brown, something that we haven't talked about for a while, but I look forward to hearing about where we are with the quiet zone. So welcome.
Thank you, Council President Troutner. Council President, Mayor Ralph, members of the City Council, my name is Rob Brown. I'm the Transportation Engineering Manager for the Public Works Department. This afternoon, I'm going to give you an update on our efforts to establish quiet zones on both of the railroads in Kent. Next slide, please. Thank you. It's been a while since I provided you with an update on our quiet zone efforts, and so I wanted to give you a quick overview on the processes for establishing quiet zones. Quiet zones were established through the federal train horn rules, part of a federal law that requires train horns at railroad crossings. And the general thought behind the process is that we need to lower the risk at all of the crossings within a quiet zone through crossing modifications and different things to the risk level that is below the current crossing configuration with trains sounding train horns. And so this is done by using, as I mentioned, crossing modifications, and specific crossing modifications that we can use to do this are spelled out in that federal train horn rule. There's a couple different ways we can use to establish quiet zones, and we're using two, one for each of our proposed quiet zones. On the Union Pacific Road quiet zone, we can use the train horn rule crossing modifications to lower the risk just through the crossing modifications to lower that risk below the current level just by doing those modifications, and we don't need any approvals from the Federal Railroad Administration. On the BNSF crossings, we couldn't quite get the risk level below just using the approved crossing modifications, and so we had to submit our proposed crossing modifications to the Federal Railroad Administration for review, and it's they do some calculations and they basically give us a partial credit for some of the ones where we can't quite meet the full that full risk reduction. And this is what I reported on in February, is that the Federal Railroad Administration had approved that in January. And so we're beyond that stage now. And so now we move on to the actual crossing modifications. And the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission is the state agency that's responsible for railroad roadway crossing safety in the state. And they approve any crossing modifications to any railroad crossing, actually all railroad crossings, take that back, in the state. And so they must also evaluate our proposed crossing modifications and approve those. So when we go to the Utilities and Transportation Commission and ask for approval to modify those crossings, they of course go to the railroad that owns the tracks that would be crossing, and also any other stakeholders or interested parties to ask for input on our proposed crossing modifications, and any of those interested parties or the railroad can object to that. Best case scenario, if we can come to agreement with all those parties, the interested parties, railroads, sign a waiver, then the UTC just goes through their approval process. That's a short process, usually around 3 months. If the railroads or interested parties object to our proposed crossing modifications, then it goes to an administrative hearing, and that process is 12 to 15 months. So in our best interest to try and work with the railroads to come to an agreement on the crossing modifications. Following those, or following the UTC approval, this then goes to a typical design and construction like any of our other improvement projects. Once that construction project is completed and those crossings are modified, we then issue what is called a notice of establishment. That's a legal notification that goes to the Federal Railroad Administration, the Utilities and Transportation Commission, the railroads, certainly, and other interested parties, to let them know that 60 days from that notification, the quiet zone will go into effect, and the railroads are then required to follow that quiet zone. Following the establishment of a quiet zone, we have to keep maintaining those quiet zones because there are some specific things in those crossing modifications that we need to keep in good shape, such as the signs, the pavement markings, the medians, pylons, things like that, or we risk losing our quiet zone. Next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, back one. Thanks. So our next steps. We're currently working with both the railroads, Union Pacific and BNSF, to try and come to agreement on the railroad crossing modifications. As I mentioned, if we can get their agreement to the crossing modifications for their specific railroads, it's basically an administrative process with the Utilities and Transportation Commission. We've recently had some good conversations with the Union Pacific Railroad about the crossings that we wanted to modify for that quiet zone. And they've hired 2 consultants to work with us on what we're proposing versus what the railroad would like to see, and see if we can come to some agreement, some middle ground that's acceptable to both of us. And we're expecting to set up our first meeting with them in the next 2 weeks. Also for the Union Pacific Railroad, but for the Willow Street crossing, we're working with the Washington State Department of Transportation, because the west side of that crossing is within the state's control of the SR 167 interchange. So in that there's still be a maintenance agreement for us to maintain the signs, pavement markings, and devices that we put on the west side of the crossing in the state's ownership. And they're also a party to the crossing since they own the west side of it. So we're going to work with them on getting their waiver. That process has gone very well. We are pretty much in the last stages of the maintenance agreements. And I believe we've come to an agreement on the language and things like that in the waiver for the Utilities and Transportation Commission modification for that specific crossing. So we're getting really close on that one. On the BNSF side, we've reached out to them, had a couple conversations with them in the last few weeks. They've had some pretty significant staff turnover on their side, but we are hoping to schedule our first meeting to actually discuss specific crossings and crossing modifications within the next 3 weeks. So if everything goes well with that and we can get the railroads to sign those waivers for the crossing modifications, we then submit that to the Utilities and Transportation Commission. And again, as I mentioned, if we can get everybody to sign waivers, it's just an administrative process with the Utilities and Transportation Commission. But if we can't, then we'll go through the hearing process, which again takes 12 to 15 months. And then following that, we would have our design and construction contracts. And then we do our notice of establishment, and 60 days later, we have a quiet zone, and then we maintain it. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions on the quiet zone? Councilmember Larmer.
Was there a slide on with the dates?
Good question.
I thought I saw one.
I'm sorry?
I thought I saw a slide with dates slip by.
That was going to be one of my slides in my back pocket, but if we can go to the next slide, I will be happy to share the schedule.
I'm just having a hard time like doing the calculations to figure out like date-wise what we're looking at.
Right. So this is a schedule, and it's starting to get fairly long. This is the schedule, or a portion of the schedule that I shared last time. This is updated for the current schedule. The difference, and this specific one says Union Pacific Railroad, but because where we are with the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration approval for the BN, and the kind of the delays we've had related to the current COVID pandemic, both of the railroad schedules are in the same place. They're identical right now. And so what we're showing is on the left side is we're showing August 2020, that's highlighted in yellow. All the different steps above that, or things that are in the past, aren't shown on the schedule. But in this one, you can see that we are highlighted in orange, kind of peachish color on the left side, coordinating grade crossing modifications with the railroad. Above that's the washed-out crossing. It's specific to UPRR in the Willow Street. But we're hoping that we can do that in about 3 months. If we can't get to some kind of resolution, or pretty close to a resolution by the end of October, we're going to have some more conversations about potentially just going forward with the UTC, or Utilities and Transportation Commission, crossing modifications and go to a hearing. So in the past schedules, the green bars are showing the best case scenario. The kind of brownish bars are showing realistic, or maybe the longer term scenario. And you can see that the line below the peach line is the petitions to the UTC. If we can get the waivers, that's about a 3-month process. Shown in green, if we have to go to an administrative hearing, excuse me, that's about 15 months. And then you can see below that, prepare the construction documents, and the construction, lump those two together, and then the notice of establishment, and then the quiet zone.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember?
It did, thank you.
All right, so Rob, I just have a quick question about this as well, because I know this was something that we always looked forward to seeing Public Works Committee. Has the timeline changed much as far as those dates? Because I know we've always had that minimum and then the realistic. Has that changed and slid any way? Or we've been able to kind of keep on track with those timeframes?
To be completely honest, ma'am, we have slid about 5 months due to the loss of communication with the railroads and the different things related to COVID. So we're about a month ahead of where we were at the last update. So
Okay.
we've lost about 5 months.
Well, and I know that there were issues. I think it was more the BNSF that you had lost that contact person kind of early on. It seems like communication has gotten a little bit better. Is that correct?
It has. The staff has been hounding both the railroads quite a bit for the last month or so to try to get those conversations restarted. And I'm happy to report that both of them have responded positively, and they both sound very interested in working with us, because it's time and effort for both of us if we can't reach an agreement and have to go to a hearing.
Okay. Well,
Council
I
President?
appreciate you. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to the council, worked with the railroads for 4 decades in different endeavors, and I like to use the term that they work at glacial velocity, about 3 feet per year. It's very, very difficult to push them. And I've been, watching and listening and talking to Rob and his team, and even before Rob was on board here at the city. And I do believe that we are pushing it along. I'm also very frustrated, especially every time I go over to First Avenue and get my ears blown off, that it hasn't gone faster, but it could be worse. So we are, and as Rob pointed out, we have been stymied a little bit because the Burlington Northern has had a change of railroad personnel. And so that can also slow things down. We don't have any, way of, even though we have a good relation, if you will, with the Federal Rail Administration, they've approved what we're doing, more or less, the plan, if you will, which is huge. We still, we're pushing the railroad, and they push back, and they ask for a lot of stuff that it's not just tens of thousands of dollars. It could be, they want a lot of signal modification. They basically want us to improve their system for them, and of course, we're not needing nor wanting to do that. And so that's where a lot of the negotiation comes that has been taking more time. So personally, even though I'd like to have this done sooner, I think we've been moving it along. Unfortunately, given the circumstances, I think we're moving along about as fast as we can.
Thank you so much for that. I do think that that's important to point that out as well. But it does seem like since our last report, there has been some progress. And I know we've asked the community to be patient, that there is an end to this at some point. It does take time to get there. So I greatly appreciate you continuing to update us. And I think Councilmember Fincher has her hand raised.
Thank you, Madam President. I was wondering, I've seen the paddles, and I was wondering if we are up to date on everything we're supposed to be doing. Are all the delays on their side? So we have to wait for them for our next step?
Yes, ma'am. We are up to date. So we are still required to maintain the grade crossings, the pavement markings. The paddles were installed, I believe, not too long after the Sound Transit, the Sounder station. But we're still required to maintain those, and those have been recently replaced. Our streets department did a nice job. If you've been downtown lately, I think they finished up the last two crossings about a week and a half ago. And so those all look nice. When we go forward with the crossing modifications, we will probably be using some similar devices to that. We may extend those barrier lines a little farther. But then we will have to stay a little more on top of the maintenance than we have been.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, they look really good. Big difference. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Rob on the quiet zone? Thank you again, Rob, for this update. We'll kind of work through agenda setting and any new things that have been happening and report back to council somewhere down the road. So I really appreciate you keeping us up to date.
Great, thank you.
All right, looking at department presentations, this brings us to the end of our agenda for today. I know this seemed like a very quick meeting, but these are important things that we need to bring before council so we can pass them on through the consent calendar. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and be safe. Have a good evening. We are adjourned.